Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, people of the world. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Everyone's a special guest. I'm joined by a fellow higher ed professional, Rich Goodman. Now, we have not met in person, but we have been connected through associations, Eastern ACE, all the like, and just in the realm of career development. And so he wanted to jump on the podcast. And as I always say is, holla at your boy, whatever you want to talk about, let's do it. But I think we're going to have a really good conversation today about the things that we see. You know, as we said, we're both working in the higher ed space. I think more specifically, we also intersect with career development. So I think we can talk about that as well. But before we get started, Rich, tell the listeners a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for having me here today, Phil. So my name is Rich Goodman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm excited to just talk to you all today. So thank you for your time. I am a higher ed professional. I'm a career advisor. I'm an employer relations guy. I write sometimes, but I really just try to be engaged in my community however I can. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you all about, the philosophy and a story. So, but yeah, that's kind of just who I am. And I'm really invested in college administration, higher education, because of the huge impact that it made on me. So I grew up in a pretty small town in West Virginia, in Appalachia, so it's a beautiful part of the world, and the people are fantastic, but there's, it's rife with economic issues, social issues. And so, to be a part of that community in a way where you can kind of, translate that into a life philosophy and a path, like it takes, a lot of help to get there. Right. And I'm definitely a beneficiary of that help. And so I want to talk about that a little bit today.
Excellent. Honestly, and you're my second guest now that I thought about it, from the Appalachia area. I had a guest previously. Her name was Nikki. She actually works with me. And I did not know opposite end of how limited, rural education is. And she was like the first person. She went to high school that had like 10 people. So when you said Appalachia, West Virginia, she was like Southwest Virginia. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about where you're from in Appalachia, and was it a very rural area with not a lot of people going to college?
That's a great question. So I grew up in a town called Martinsburg, West Virginia. So it's in the Eastern Panhandle, and it's one of the most affluent parts of the state. But it's, the state overall is still pretty rife with economic issues. But the Eastern Panhandle being so close to DC and Northern Virginia, it's a great place, for folks that are living in West Virginia that still has, low expenses for housing and education. They can still, commute into DC or into Nova and get those jobs, come back and apply it back to their local communities.
Yeah, but saying that, so was it an expectation you growing up to go to college? Like a lot of people, no. For instance, the one that I shared with my other colleague in that area, West Virginia, or not West Virginia, but the Appalachia, she was like the first of many generations to go to college.
Yes.
She went to one that actually, Berea, which had free tuition. It was meant for that. It was out there too, like a very rural college that really helped students in rural areas go to college. But what about you, growing up in this affluent area, still touch point? What was that kind of growing up? Was that the expectation to go to college?
Sure. Well, I'll give a caveat that I think relative to the rest of West Virginia, it's a little bit more well off, but there's still a lot of poverty, still a lot of issues within, the town. But the town is kind of split by the highway, right? So on one side of 81 is, it's pretty open farmland, but it's mostly been segmented off into, these very suburban neighborhoods that we'd all go to on Halloween to get the big candy, But on the other side of the highway is the actual town itself, and it's been developed a lot over the last few years. But I grew up in a street that was pretty frequently just see officers on the street, and there are stories of my friends and how they had to move because their parent was going off to jail or something like that. And so it was a part of the town where building the network within my neighborhood my parents kind of discouraged it. Like, when I got older, I could go outside and I could play and everything. But, as I got older, I started to learn why we didn't drive down certain streets, why, I couldn't go past the end of the block, because there's a lot of stories in that, that town. And like, even when I told my friends when I went to, middle school, where it was a little bit closer to across the highway, a lot of my friends, when I told them where I was from, they were like, "Oh my God," which again, it's not that bad, right? But it had a reputation for being that bad. And so in that neighborhood, a lot of folks weren't talking about going to college. They weren't, hosting any kind of parties. They were staying to themselves, and when they were usually yelling at each other, right? And so that idea of kind of building the community up, I'm very thankful is happening now in Martinsburg. The college part of my experience, right? So I did pretty well in school, but I was very easily distracted. So I would talk a lot and get in trouble a lot. But I had a couple of key teachers along the way that really influenced me, right? One was in 11th grade, I had a chemistry teacher, Kaz, and he stopped me one day after class when I walked up to him, and, in my 16-year-old entitled, I don't get this assignment. And he told me, "Well, you got to try." And I thought, just the audacity of this man, right? To say that to me. And that kind of sparked back in me again that I can do this. I got to actually apply myself. And that, like, one sentence that he had the courage to say to me totally changed my outlook on high school. I started getting A's again. I started actually going to school again. And then the other teacher was one that I barely even knew and didn't, Mrs. Laidlaw, my health teacher, just randomly said to me one day I should apply for a scholarship. And prior to that, I had no idea what the process was, how to apply, to college. My parents didn't go to college. And, so I just kind of, I brushed it off and said, yeah, sure, whatever. So I applied, and then I got it. And like, it was a full tuition scholarship. It's a small, it's a small college in West Virginia called Shepherd University, but it's tuition. And so that made the difference. Like, that is what, prior to that, I might have been considering it as an option, but this was the thing, well, if it's paid for, I guess I have to go now, so that's a huge influence as to kind of what lifted me up out of that situation and went on to, a whole different path.
I love it. And I think you really spoke to a lot of things, like you spoke to, one, the influence of educators earlier than college. Mm-hmm. I think that's one thing that came out of this, from your story. And two is just this hidden knowledge, right? Like, affluent people, it's funny. I feel like the rich people actually knows about scholarships, but don't need them. You know what I'm saying? Sure. And the people that need scholarships don't know it, right? Like the information is made knowledgeable to people that don't need that resource. Right. And then for those that do need it, like, they're like, I didn't know nothing about it. What does that kind of resonate with you? Because I'm like, I think about that all the time. Like, rich people know about prepping for the SAT and all these things to do in high school. And those, they don't, the resources that people really need is the awareness gap for them, as opposed to those that don't really need it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, again, it's like I grew up in a household, where I got all of the, really essential, really important, and things that I'm really proud of, lessons about, compassion and empathy and learning and, and loving people and just respect. And my parents always worked extremely hard. My dad always had 2 jobs. Mom was a CNA. She was the breadwinner, but we were still a low income family. And, we benefited from a lot of different social programs and things like that. And it's those interventions that are kind of designed by the community, to catch those people that don't have, the neighbor or the auntie in their, in their corner whispering in their ear saying, hey, you should do this thing. I know this guy, whatever. That makes a huge difference, because the generational networking available to folks that have previously had success in their family is going to continue to impact, right? Like, it's a huge part of privilege. Like, I know that I was born with, a great deal of privilege as well, because of my other social identities. But this one is extremely important for social mobility, because of the idea of not only having the financial means, but the social clout to be able to make influence and create opportunities, right? And so, like, those opportunities that are built through the education system, through extracurricular activities, through communities, through different, fellowship opportunities like churches and stuff like that, are extremely important and extremely influential.
Yeah, excellent. So, take us there. You got to Shepherd, right? And I think that's half of your journey. I know a lot of people went to Shepherd for football, like a small, Q3. But you get to Shepherd, right?
Yep.
And I'm assuming your first gen of
first
college.
Gen.
So how did you navigate that space as being the first to go to college? And then similar, did, that hidden curriculum too. Like it didn't stop, right? Like knowing about scholarships, knowing about going to college, that's a large gap for first gen students. But then once you get to college, there's a whole new curriculum, as I said earlier, that more affluent people will know about, like office hours, and know about these resources that are on campus for you. So how was your college experience at Shepherd?
Yeah, that's a great point, because again, like just like the vocabulary alone of like what does a registrar do, or is totally new. Like, aside from the whole idea of what expectations there are, how the classroom is different than high school, things like that. And those aren't things that are taught as any part of a curriculum. At least they weren't like when I was in high school. And so it was extremely important to have those people around you that could kind of see the flags of this kid who's kind of wandering around looking down at his his iPhone 4, just looking for his class and has no idea, what these different words mean. And, it's extremely important to have those in place. So when I first started in college, I always knew that I loved working with people, taking care of people, thinking about just what made folks tick, right? And so I was like, okay, psychology all the way. So I'm going to major in psychology, first semester, I'm going to go for it. But I was with people frequently studying because I was a commuter as well, right? Like my parents couldn't give me any money for college, but they could let me stay there for free. And it was a huge influence for me too, right? So it was when I sat with the STEM majors in biology and chemistry that they started to, I started to get the impression of, of a certain segmentation between majors, right? Of like, well, these are the hard majors and these are the easy ones. And I remember that somebody said to me one day, well, biology is a real science, right? And that, I don't know if you know, Phil, but first gen students are hungry, right? And they're hungry to prove something to themselves, to the people. And so as soon as that came up, I'm like, I could do biology, I could do chemistry, I'm going to do medicine actually. And so I started to double major at that point. But the biology part was purely chasing the idea of success. I found it fascinating because I'm just a curious person, but I didn't really ever stop to think, do I want to do this for a career? And that's such a common thing for college students too, is pausing to think of the influences that are steering them, right? But that was only one part of it. Beyond that, all the different staff and faculty that were there, right, who have been trained to kind of help these different students develop. The first time that I was reached out to by a TRIO advisor, right? And TRIO is a government program that's on different campuses, to help first gen students, low income students, students with disabilities. And it was an invitation to join TRIO. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. I don't want to do this. Again, I'm always skeptical of these things. But I was introduced to this idea, and I interviewed with one of the advisors, and I didn't really understand what first gen meant at that point, right? So like, I didn't really understand my qualifications to join this group. I was just invited. So, but they said, we got free printing.
Yeah.
We take, trips sometimes and stuff like that. It's a quiet computer lab you can always use. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm sold. And they said, well, you got to meet with us, 2-3 times a semester. And I was like, that's fine. I'm down. and that was it, right? Just having that first step of being able to communicate with students and know what things they might know and might not know, and translate what you're offering and trying to do in a way that's compelling to them as a non-college familiar person is very helpful. And so that's kind of what got me on the track of academic success in college, right? So, but that was my undergrad, and I ended up staying at Shepherd for my grad.
So I was curious, I have stereotypes, and we think about first gen as mostly intersected with Black and brown.
Sure.
So when you were part of the TRIO program, were you like a very few white students in that TRIO program, or being the proximity to West Virginia is a little different?
Throughout West Virginia, it's a predominantly white state, right?
Yeah.
So like this part of West Virginia and the Eastern Panhandle was no exception to that. It's again it's closer to bigger areas, but it's not quite as rural, but it definitely has a good mix of folks from different demographics. But I will say that prior to coming to college, like my whole mindfulness about inclusivity totally changed, right? Like I was coming from a place where microaggressions were the norm and they were funny, right? And now I came to college where I learned about all the things that I was doing wrong and how it was hurtful to people, and like that also totally changed my life. And so even though I was raised in this household that prioritized love and acceptance, the idea of that acceptance, including mindfulness about impact, was totally foreign to me, right? So like steps along the way, there were interventions, not just for my own, like academic and career success, but also my personal development were hugely influential as well.
I love it. One of the thoughts about too is like, I see it around me. So where a lot of the trio staff, mostly women, because, like I said, you don't see a lot of men, more particularly men of color. So tell me a little bit about the staff that supported you and who they were and how helpful they were.
Yeah, of course. So the two folks that I met first in trio were two incredible women, both women of color, both Black women, and they were just so open and welcoming to everyone in the whole organization, right? And their names were Cynthia Copney and Evora Baker, and those two like really helped me to get a foundation and kind of be, like my, second and third moms, aunties on campus, because I can go in there and talk to them about not only my classroom, but also like, I don't understand this thing, or I had this, problem with this person or whatever, and they can provide that anchor point, which is on campus and accessible, but also a little bit more secluded, to provide a community of folks that can be authentic and have a safe space to learn about what it's like for the expectations of college and beyond.
I love it. So that influence, right? We talked about medicine. When did you start navigating and pivoting and thinking about grad school?
Yeah, well, so in my senior year, right, I was doing, I was pre-med, and I was completing my bio and psych degrees, and I was prepping for the MCAT. And I thought, well, I might, I'm not really sure what I want to do. And so let's take a little bit of a gap where I can study and do really well in the MCAT next year. Right. And so I started a Master's of Arts in Teaching program at Shepherd. Again, I knew I liked working with people, but I had no idea about it. I was just fascinated by these different fields and thought that if I could apply the connection between academics with people, great. And so I started, in this teacher program, and again, I was first gen all over again, because the idea of grad school was also new. I had no idea what like a GA was, and so I was going into my trio office and I was saying, "Hey, I saw that you have this administrative assistant role that's open. Can I apply for it?" And they said, "Well, you can, or you could apply for this GA role. It's open to get free tuition." And I'm like, "Well, I'll do that one, right?" And then like that's what kind of got me in my first exposure as a trio GA to higher ed, right? And just kind of learning about all the folks that were around me that were constantly influencing me and literally got me to where I am today. Those people, I could be a part of that. And like that was extremely influential to me for my career choices. And so from working in trio, I then discovered that there was another program at Shepherd called the College Student Development Administration Program. I took an elective in the CSDA program for the teaching program, and I loved the topic. I loved the people. I loved the idea of this field. And so after that, I added the CSDA as a second program, but again, too stubborn to drop the first one, which I would have done that now if I can go back, because that was just too much for my final semester of doing student teaching plus a practicum. And so at Shepherd, all the grad students are the hall directors there. So I had a staff of RAs, and I got to learn more about some of the background of student affairs in that kind of practical sense. And that is what really set me off into the field of higher education as a profession.
Talk about that transition to higher ed as a profession, like when you was like, okay, started to click, like I'm gonna do this, and was that transition into it smooth? Like you gotta.
Yeah, good question. So I think in higher education, like it's usually most accessible to get jobs that are either within res life, admissions, maybe academic advising, the ones that have several of the same kind of positions on a campus that have openings that are usually entry level, and so they might have high turnover. And so in my first job out of grad, where I was a hall director, I went on to stay in residence life as an area coordinator, which is pretty much the same thing. And then after that, I, again, just being this kind of like naturally curious person, I was looking into other departments and seeing how I can collaborate with them and just kind of seeing if I could volunteer in different ways. And so I found this this department that was a collaboration between the career office, the volunteer office, the study abroad office. And I thought that was so fascinating, because those are the things that, again, I did not take advantage of when I was an undergrad. And so the idea of that being like a one office for all those different experiential learning opportunities was awesome. So I wanted to volunteer for that, for a new program they were doing, which was a pre-orientation program for the summer, to bring students on campus to get that like 1 or 2 days of exposure to what college even means. That was the first time that the networking really took off, right? Because I demonstrated to these people that I was invested in this goal. And so through that, when an opening came up, they said, "Hey, there's an opening coming up, you should apply for it, right? And so that was when I first started to realize, oh, this networking stuff actually works. Actually pursue things that you're really curious about and be open to the idea that it's going to be a little bit awkward at first, but then you'll get into it, right? And so I took that job as a career advisor there. And then I was part of kind of a broader collaboration. In 2020, we were trying to innovate how we provide the career fair experience. And so we collaborated with a bunch of different schools to put on our first virtual job fair. From that, another networking opportunity came up because they saw that I took lead of this big virtual fair, and they said, "Hey, you should apply for this job." So I did, and then I got that one. And I'm still career advising to this day. I still, very much appreciate all the opportunities that have been given to me from my college advisors, and so I very much intend to give back that way too.
So one of the things, and we're kind of pulling out your whole journey.
Sure.
Yeah, we did this, and I love it. It was really the root of it was education and the access to education, and not only the access to education, but the access to supports while you're there.
Right.
So maybe we talk about that. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, and I'll just share one real quickly. Is like, I believe that education is the gateway to the future, but at the same time, it's not enough to say, okay, here's the key gateway education. You got to support people through, because
right.
You can say, oh, I gave them the access to get there, and then they flunk out, right?
Right.
Or I give them access to get there, but then they ain't got enough money to, like you said, have room and board, right? They don't have the holistic support. So, like, talk about a little bit about that duality there.
Yeah. Well, again, like being a person who has very much benefited from social mobility through education, I know the power of it, and I also know that the students don't often know the power of it, right? And so, like, introducing them through different interventions. And so that's why the career office for me is the place to be, because I want to be able to translate what they're doing, what they're loving, and the best part of their life, hopefully, into this fulfilling career of things that they actually care about, and where they are respected, and where they are, being included. But I think that whole community is essential, right? Is having the different people along the way that are kind of holistically looking at this student and being able to say what they need in that moment. So if the faculty have like a deadline for an assignment, being able to recognize the humanity of this person and give an extension because of this huge loss in their family. And that broad community of recognizing the potential of somebody, that's the most important part here for equity, right? Because even though, yes, they all have the same classes they can attend, they don't necessarily have the same things happening at home. And so this idea of accessibility just being access is not the way that it is, right? It's important to instill in students, the importance of recognizing ways to advance through different avenues, right? And so, like, the academics is one part of it, but also the extracurriculars is a big part of it. The networking is a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. And I think one of the things I loved, I saw this guy, was like the business of higher ed is like, yeah, I love that we want our students to go out in the world and be lifelong learners and curious. But at the same time, we want our students to go out there in the world and be lifelong earners.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, like, shout out to being real and transparent, like not being foo-foo about it. Like, I want kids to have a great experience, but also don't want them to go out in the world, be broke the rest of their life.
That's it.
So that career piece is really important, right? Like, finding a way to sustainably find purpose, but also earn a livable wage. So, you should, what resonated with you when I said that statement about lifelong earnership rather than just learnership?
That's great. I think, again, we hold a lot of ideas simultaneously that are conflicting, but we still, kind of bear the flag and just think this is the way that it is, right? Like, we have this sermon almost about how college is a way that you can just translate what your curiosities and your passions are into, a lifelong experience, while also saying that you have the potential here to go on to do all these different things, but trying as best as possible to not conflate the two, to say that I know that you want to be a teacher in this region, but they don't make very much. So we're going to ignore that part for right now and just say, go be a teacher. And then we'll deal with, you have opportunities later on for advancement. That's not, working within your passion is not a benefit that employers should list on a description, right? It's an added part of your experience that can be worthwhile, but it's not something for employers to lean on. And it's the same thing too with colleges. It's really important to be proactively transparent about what the realities are of working in this field. If you all the students go into college, and one of the most common outcomes that they will cite are things like doctors and lawyers, because ever since they were a kid, their
Yeah.
their parents said, this is what you want to do. You want to go and be an engineer. You want to go and be a pilot because they're making a lot of money. And that's a good priority to keep in mind. That's not necessarily the only one, but I think colleges also go a little bit too far to the other end of the spectrum and say, well, that's not important. That is important. That's the reality of life, is you have to pay your bills too, right?
Mhm.
And so if we can kind of pursue both, the best way to do that is to explain one with the other in coordination, so that it's a transparent overall picture of what opportunities are.
Yeah, I love that. No, I was about to say that, man, because I think like, you know, the holistic, value-driven career, passion-driven career, but also the reality of real talk is like, but also financial means and survival and bills to pay, and having that real talk with students and adults and throughout the process, man. I think about it. We're always constantly navigating this, not just in college. But I also say, though, I agree. It's weird duality, because like I also understand that, I would not have this access for education. So like I need to respect education and getting a doctor. So it's just kind of crazy, right? Because like it doesn't just stop when you're out, right? It's throughout your career, having this holistic approach. Like I got bills and kids, but also I want to also be happy and actually do something that gives me fulfillment, and balancing that. So I think having those conversations before you have the wife and kids, these are things that we need to have, those real talk conversations with the kids.
Yeah. And then just like a shout out to the people that are thinking, well, I didn't go to college. I'm not going to go to college. I don't have any kids, whatever. And that's totally okay too. There's still opportunities for you to be influential in someone's success, and create opportunities for mobility socially, and create some networking opportunities. Like I my wife makes fun of me for this, but every time that I drive by a lemonade stand or like a snowball stand in Baltimore, I'm always going to stop, because I remember when I was a little kid, I sat at the end of my road and there was nobody coming by, and I sat there with a lemonade stand, and I made like, I think, $1.50, and those three people that came by made all the difference, and I felt like it was a huge success. And it's tough to kind of pass those opportunities up and not want to support a student who's just trying to get a new bike or a new basketball or whatever. And so those small things can also be a huge influence on someone's positivity and optimism about what they can do and how they can advance from where they are to where they want to be, right? It's the small things. It could be, you want to be an assistant coach on like a rec league basketball team, or you want to be an advisor for your 4-H club, whatever it might be, is very helpful for, just to provide one more opportunity for that person to have a mentor, to have an intervention, to have a supportive person in their life that can help to correct certain things that might get in the way of their long-term success, and introduce things that could be new doors for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things to think about, just pivot, is then what do you think is moving forward? What do you think that we can do better to, really be honest about the social mobility of education, but also just prepare people better, or also just be reality. Like, I have some thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
Yeah. Well, I think that within the college setting, I think that it's important, I think, first, just to have, as often as possible, people being able to relate to their students is a great way for students to build trust with you and understand they can come to you with questions. And so the more you can kind of have indicators of what things that you are there for them for, right? So having like a pride flag on your door, or having like a first gen sticker on your badge, something like that, is a great way for them to say, oh, I can connect with this person on this level, which might just be one more way for them to identify you as a potential help, right? But I think also, again, just like the transparency, I think as more employers, and especially colleges, are able, to list, a salary range, to be able to say, yes, it's contingent upon, it's commensurate with your experience, but it's also like, this is your possibility. I'm not going to try to undercut you from day one. I want you to have some trust in me. This is the range. Please sell yourself, and we'll talk about the possibilities. That's great. But it's those kind of transparencies in conversations about success, about how you got there. Again, like, people, it doesn't happen often that folks just kind of wake up and then, their success the next day, and they might have a lot more help getting to where they are than you do. And that's just the reality of how things go. But the more we can talk about the meandering of studying 3 or 4 different things and then only using one of them, for your career is extremely helpful to be able to show it's okay, to wander and to explore and to be able to not know what you're wanting to do in the very next moment, because you are trying to build your experience through exposure, and that exposure is really helpful too.
Excellent. Well, I think we're really hitting some themes here. I did lie. I said the only part of my show was organized was shots and plugs. But as you know, if you listen, then I do have a segment called Shot for Shot. So you get to ask any random question. I ask any random question. You want to go first? I go first.
You go first.
All right. So I know West Virginia is very split in football. Either you are a what's it called, Marshall fan or WVU fan.
Yeah.
Which one did you grow up and why?
So, okay. So I grew up in a household that wasn't particularly sports aligned, right? But, I grew up at a high school that was very competitive and very successful in football and basketball. And then in Shepherd in D2, we went to the championships when I was, I think in my junior year, I forget. But so it was a very competitive space. And so we were Shepherd fans, first of all, because it was right there and that's where we went to. But for D1 schools, it was definitely WVU. I love Marshall because it's it's a little bit more of the underdog in it, but it's so much further away. It's another part of the state. And so throughout the state, it's pretty dominated by WVU. But then when you get down to the Southwest where Huntington is, that's where the Marshall fans are like, no, we're here for the herd all the way.
There it is. And I know I learned that story, like that's the big thing. Randy Moss and Chad Pennington, all that. But but then you see WVU all over the place. Like I went to Deep Creek, Maryland, which is still Maryland, but that's WVU. That's all West Virginia. So I knew that. So what's your question for me?
My question for you is, what is the thing that you integrate most into your professional life that is a example of your interest in your personal life?
Oh, okay. So my hobbies and how I make it professional. Okay, podcasting basically, right?
Okay.
Media, public speaking. So those are things that I think, not really in my job description, right? But they have informed me professionally because by me investing my time in being a better public speaker or podcaster, it's made me more comfortable doing presentations and doing things where I had to talk to an audience and do things where like this, you ask me a question and I'm ready. For instance, one example is I joined Toastmasters, right? And that was a way for me to practice public speaking. But, one of the components of Toastmasters is impromptu speaking, right? Table topics. So I'm now ready to prepare to talk on a fly like you did with asking me this question. Or I'm ready to do full things too, real speeches that I had to prepare for. Right. So I think the hobby or the interest of really diving into public speaking and doing interviews and podcasting has just made me a more confident speaker, which I think translates to my profession and doing phone calls with employers and, talking to parents and just being able to talk on the fly is because of all that constant practice and constant exposure to it and things that are hobbies, like you said, not really paid for. Even though anyone listening, if they want a paid public speaker to come out and talk to the kids, holler at your boy. I do paid speaking engagements. But so thank you so much, Rich. I mean, this has been a very great conversation. Definitely appreciate you following up and getting on here. So now this is the part of the show called Shout Outs and Plugs. Obviously, share with the listeners ways that you would like them to connect with you if comfortable, as well as the things that you're working on. I said earlier, writing or bringing that back, whatever. So shout outs and plugs.
Yeah, sure. I would say, and please connect with me on LinkedIn if you like. Just Rich Goodman on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with you there. As far as just kind of things to plug, I really just want to plug again different ways in which you are kind of most comfortable getting engaged with your community again, right? So if that is volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club or whatever it might be, I think that's the really important part you can kind of have in your influence, is being able to be a part of those communities and kind of lift each other's up. My shout outs are for all the different people that have gotten me to where I am, because I definitely wouldn't be here without you. Career advisors and personal professional advisors along the way through college, through grad school, and my mentors through work. I'm thankful for all of you, and I'm thankful also for Phil. So thank you all very much.
Well, thank you so much, Rich. It's been a really great conversation. I really appreciate your time. And I just, everyone connect with him. He connected with me on LinkedIn, and definitely a great partner in sharing ideas as it relates to the career space. Positive Filter listeners, please share this share this episode with your family members and friends. That's how we elevate the podcast, as well as every episode is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund for all his work and advocacy against fighting food insecurity with FRAC. So please contribute to that. I put that in the show notes of every episode. Give this episode or this show a like, a subscribe, a review, or share. This helps elevate the podcast and just bring more listeners to it. And thank you so much, and we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.